Hey everybody, welcome back to Reachin Reverie, and thank you so much for choosing today's video to watch. I wanted to share with you guys today the final garden that I'm going to be planting at this residence before we move on to our 5 acres of raw land. And next season we will be starting a much different, much larger garden over there. I think we're going to start over in the corner and work our way back. So in this far bed, I've actually just reseeded because we have a little whiptail lizard that has decided to dig around in our beds, and he has uprooted a lot of our little seedlings. I'm actually really thankful for this lizard because before the lizard, I had this massive roly-poly infestation, and they were just wreaking havoc on all of my young seedlings. And so I was thinking about organic ways to manage the roly-polies, and it seems like just in about a week's time this little whiptail lizard has just come in and just completely abolished, I'd say, at least 90% of the roly-polies that I'm seeing. He also likes to dig up little seedlings, and then they just kind of wither away and die. So in this bed over here, it looks a little bit sparse, but if you look closely, I've got some little seedlings that we can say happy birthday to. So in this bed, I'm aspiring to grow squash and melons. I have Boston pickling cucumbers that I've restarted over here. This is a cantaloupe. I think it's Hale's Best. And then I have more cantaloupes right here. My lone survivor of my squash is a green zucchini. And then I also have a bunch of Jack B. Little pumpkins that are going to start popping up over here. Before, I had done some Armenian cucumbers, more Boston cucumbers. I think I had started another melon like the Charentaise over here. And that little lizard, I'm telling you, you can actually see in the beds where he has basically dug out almost like a trench along the edge of this bed. And then he comes in and will dig underneath the little seedlings looking for bugs and then just mess with their root systems. He's burrowed a little bit into my potato corner over there, and so I feel like I just have to keep coming back, and any seedlings that he uproots, I'm just covering back up and pressing back in to give him a chance at survival. And once everything's getting established, he leaves them alone, and it's great. And I've just sort of decided to let the lizard be because I'd rather deal with a cute little lizard eating pests than have to deal with the pests myself. Definitely grow organically. I don't use any kind of chemicals or pesticides in my garden. So the lizard's kind of doing me a little bit of a favor, and my tax from him is that I just need to plant a little bit heavier this year. I do have a Shasta daisy right here that I'm hoping will flower. This is its second season here, and it hasn't flowered yet, but you can tell that it's about to flower because instead of being bushy, it's starting to shoot up these long shoots right here. So I'm hoping to see some flowers on him here pretty soon, and then he can attract some pollinators to our garden. I also have a chamomile plant right here and another chamomile back there. When I started seeds, I like to start my seeds really heavily, and then I have the option to thin out if we have a low germination rate. I probably started about 20 or 30 chamomile in about 2 of these solo cup pots, and then once they started growing a little bit bigger, I separated all the chamomile out into individual plants and scattered them throughout my garden. I also have dill, which is looking really healthily here. I usually don't actually get to eat very much dill because right about the time that it gets big enough to harvest is when the butterflies come in, and dill is a great host plant for caterpillar larvae for the butterflies to eat. In the corners of a lot of my beds, you'll also see different varieties of basil. And I do the same thing with the basil as I do with my chamomile. I typically start, you know, a large pinch of herb seeds in a solo cup, and then as they start sprouting, I essentially will just dump the pot out and separate the little seedlings, being really careful to try to not damage the roots. And then I will just pop them in all over the garden in different corners so that I can have herbs easily available, essentially as needed. In fact, today I'm gonna go in and pinch the tops off of all of my basil plants, and I'm gonna cook with basil tonight. I think I'm gonna do like a Thai basil chicken recipe that is just super delicious. So with the basil, what you're gonna do is, you can see at the plant that's got this nice beautiful bushy top, and underneath you can see a node where there's a pair of new sprouting leaves coming out. So you would pinch the basil right above the node, and then it will make your basil plant stronger and bushier, because once you clip off the top of the plant, it'll start growing out 2 new stems, and essentially every time you prune your plant, it will just get bushier and bushier. So I am going to do that to all of my little basil plants to make them stronger. Instead of just having one long leggy stem with basil on the end, you're going to have multiple shoots going out from the elbows of those plants. It also gives you more basil to eat. And the other reason that you like to pinch off is when the temperatures get warmer, your basil will go to seed. The flavor will become less sweet and it won't be as good for eating. The final thing to note in the middle of this bed that we have growing is I have Chinese noodle beans. I do have some cups scattered throughout the garden. At this time of year, it's actually too hot to try to start seeds in my greenhouse. In the shade, the greenhouse can get over 100 degrees. In fact, today the high is 97. It is May 25th, and we are getting into summer here. It's a little bit of an early summer this year. So I'm starting my new little seedlings just in the garden where they can already be acclimated to the full sun environment. I'm essentially coming out every day though and making sure that they're staying moist so that the seeds can germinate. What I have in my little cups, I have 15 cups per flat and then a couple extra, and I have 3 flats. So we have about 50 new little starts that I am trying to grow of native plants that we are going to take and plant on our 5-acre property. The different plants that we're starting are bird of paradise, little shrubby bush type pollinating flowers, and I also am planting desert willows. And all of these seeds that I'm starting today, I actually was able to forage for here locally as they are native plants. The desert willow I'm extremely excited about. I'm going to be starting 3 different color varieties: white, a light pink, and then a dark magenta colored flower. It is a native pollinator here in the area that actually is blooming this time of year, and I'm really excited about it. The trees, you know, you can have anything from like a small, like 3-foot, like shrub-like bush from the desert willow, and then it also grows up as high as probably about 25 to 30 feet high, as big as I've seen them. And it can provide shade, pollinators. It's beautiful to look at, and it's just one of my favorite local native vegetative things that you could plant in this area. And then transitioning over to my tomato bed, everybody's doing pretty well so far this year. Growing nice and tall. I like to grow my tomatoes vertically. I do prune off the suckers, which are the new growth that come out of the elbows of the plants. And I do typically pull off the first fruit of the season. One example where I left a tomato on the plant as I transplanted it, I should have pulled it off and I didn't, is this little guy right here. And you can see he's about half as tall as the other tomatoes, and he actually almost died. And last week I went ahead and pulled off his first tomato that was a nice sized little tomato, but he was putting all of his energy into this one tomato and suffering because of it. So I ended up pruning off all of his dead leaves, and he essentially just has his crown left. and I pulled off his tomato, and since then he's bouncing back. I think that tomato would have died just pouring all of its energy into that first tomato. So whenever I transplant new tomatoes into the garden from their little solo initial starter cups into the garden, I will pull off any flowers or little small tomatoes that I see, so that whenever you plant them, they can put their energy into growing strong roots and growing into strong plants. And that's an example of why you do that. I didn't do that on that particular tomato as an example. In this bed, I have several varieties of indeterminate tomatoes. We have Black Krim, Amish Paste, Queen of the Night, Orange Peach, and Sartre Roulois. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that last one correctly. Again, I have some basil tucked away in the corners of these beds. I also have a few peanut plants. This is the Ecuadorian pinstriped peanut. And I thought peanuts would be a good thing to plant under tomatoes, just because peanuts need a lot of space. When they flower, they actually will drop the flower into the ground and develop the peanut underground. And so I thought that having a lot of space to do so would benefit the plants. And with tomatoes, I will prune all of the lower limbs off of the plant so that it can provide airflow under the tomatoes. So we'll see this year if they make good companion plants. So far they're doing pretty good. I'm not seeing any bad side effects to the tomatoes in planting the peanuts below them, but it's kind of an experiment. I like to try new things every year and see what works, and I thought that this would be a good utilization of space, having those two plants planted together. Back on the original side of this tomato bed, I did also have some flowers planted below the tomatoes as well. I have convolvulus, which I believe is like a type of petunia, and they are struggling quite a bit with the sun and the heat. I think that they would have been lended better to a shadier environment. I also have, and I might pronounce this incorrectly, gazania, which is a beautiful flower, and I think that these are gonna pop up some beautiful flowers here once they get nice and established. I do have a single little nasturtium plant. I always plant nasturtium every year, and this year I had pretty poor germination with nasturtium, but I went ahead and planted him next to my tomatoes because he is a good trap crop in that he likes to attract bad bugs to him and kind of lure them away from the tomatoes. So he's my little sacrificial beautiful plant that is going to keep my tomatoes nice and healthy. Right next to my tomato bed, I do have a pot of what I thought would be my cole tomatoes. I have a Buratino tomato and a Brad's Atomic, and both of these were doing really poorly in their starter cups starting out, and once I planted them out, they have just taken off. And this really shows me, don't give up on your plants too soon. Sometimes all they need to do is get planted out for them to thrive. And I think that because there's no pests in this pot, no roly-polies or anything, they haven't had the pressure and struggle to really get started like my other tomatoes did. This Buratino also seems to be kind of a long, lanky variety compared to my other tomatoes. So when I thought he was getting really leggy, maybe that's just his type. And it's my first time growing the Buratino. I'm really excited to see how his fruit production is. You can see he has a bunch of flowers right here, and he's gonna be providing like a yellow orangey type tomato, which should have lower acidity and should be a really good, really nice tomato to grow. And what I mean by that pressure from pests, let's take a look at the bottom of these tomatoes. So you can see how it's really like barky and dried up. The first few inches, we actually had roly-polies in this bed eating the stems on these young tomatoes. And they just stripped the outer layer of these tomatoes. And in some cases, they actually chewed holes in the tomatoes. Like right here, there's a hole that goes almost all the way through that stem. Now, tomatoes are super hardy, and they typically can heal and recover from stuff like this, unlike some other plants. But you can also see, like on my peanuts, they eat the leaves, and so peanuts like really warm weather. And what I've noticed is at night they will relax their stems, and the stems will rest on the ground, and the roly-polies will come out at night when the ground is moist and eat on the leaves, and then in the day the peanut will pick its leaves back up. And so I've noticed coming out each morning that the roly-polies are doing this, and they're taking advantage of these peanuts resting on the ground and eating their beautiful leaves. I've always grown peppers in this bed, and I do feel like it does really well because peppers like to do what we call hold hands, meaning that when they grow and mature, they like to be close enough spaced that their leaves will touch the next plant that's neighboring them. And I feel like in a 4x4 bed, this is a great place to plant a lot of, densely planted pepper plants, and they do really well. So in this bed, we have habanadas. I have some jalapeno peppers. The 2 jalapenos I planted this year are the brown jalapeno, which is just doing fantastic. And I also have a Hungarian black jalapeno, which typically are like a dark, deep purple colored jalapeno plant. I've noticed that the Hungarian jalapenos are typically smaller in size, and then the brown jalapeno is more of like the standard sized jalapeno. And you can kind of see the plant sizes almost reflective of that as well. I do have a Buena Mulata, which I grow almost every year. It looks a lot like a cayenne pepper, but they are really beautiful, deep, rich, purple colored peppers. And this plant, you can see I have him staked up with multiple stakes, and this is because of the roly-polies. They've chewed almost clear through his stem in multiple areas, and without this support, he would have fallen over and died. And really, he's doing really great. He's got beautiful purple flowers all over. Has nice new bright green leaves. So overall, a nice sturdy, stout little cayenne pepper plant, but he does need a little bit of support because of those roly-polies. In my pepper bed, I've noticed the lizard hasn't been getting in here and eating the roly-polies like he's been doing in the 2 beds behind me. So what I've done is I've actually put some backwards duct tape at the bottom of my pepper plant stems, and I've noticed that this is largely aiding the peppers and a little bit of like a defense mechanism, keeping those roly-polies from eating the stems of my tender little pepper plants. Behind those initial plants, I also have mini bell peppers. We have pepperoncinis, shishitos, and blot peppers in this bed. And this one lighter colored plant is not a pepper. This is actually an African basil, and it does better in the hot weather. The leaves look more like a pepper plant than a basil plant to me, but it is a really stout basil plant. To me, just smelling my fingers after touching that plant, it's a really strongly flavored basil plant. You can see I already topped this one, and those new shoots are going to turn into 2 strong stems coming out of it. This pot in the corner, I have a whole lot of chamomile. You can see all of this right here is chamomile. I also have some blue Sirius sage and a little zinnia plant in the back to give us some colorful flowers here soon. And then in our next bed, this bed typically doesn't do very well because I think it gets too much shade in the heat of the summer season. But my black-eyed Susan loves that. The black-eyed Susan is a native perennial here that grows in Texas, and I think that the Chihuahuan Desert is a little dry for it. It does struggle in the really hot days, and it thrived all winter long. And so this one just started blooming. This is actually its second year here in this bed. I picked it up in Austin at the Wildflower Center when it was about this big back last year when we took my dog Evie for a vet appointment. I visited my sister and she lives there in Austin and took us to the Wildflower Center. And I'm really glad I picked this guy up because he has beautiful flowers. His leaves are like velvety soft and he likes to attract lots of pollinators. On either side of my black-eyed Susan, I do have tomatillos. Tomatillos are native to Mexico, and here in the Chihuahuan Desert, they do really, really well. And so I have 5 tomatillos planted in this space. That's probably too many because they can grow to be they can grow to be rather large, and they are already full of little flowers. Now tomatillos, you have to have more than one plant for them to grow fruit. So hopefully with these 5 plants in here, we'll get nice pollination and some really nice tangy tomatillo fruit. In the back over here is what I call my little perennial herb section. I have catnip. This is its second year here. This plant is huge. It's taking up this whole space right here. I also have a thyme plant, which is doing really, really well. More basil, some peppermint stick balsam, and this is an asparagus fern plant that's just draping over this lattice right here. Behind the asparagus, I have yarrow, which is telling me that it's thirsty and needs some water. This yarrow, it is a perennial that does fantastic in cool weather, but it does tend to struggle here in the heat and the hottest part of our summers. So typically after it goes through its flowering period, which it is having right now, I will actually cut a lot of this back and really deeply water, and we'll have a second wave of flowers here later in closer into the fall. My lilies are doing really good. I have another little yarrow. This is what a healthy young little yarrow looks like. Yarrow typically, from my experience, won't bloom until it's at least 2 seasons old. And this one I started from seed this past winter. And then I have dianthus. That dianthus is 3 or 4 years old. It typically will take up the whole pot, but it's died back to half of the pot. So I went ahead and planted some lemon balm in there too as a friendly neighbor. Now lemon balm you actually have to be kind of careful with. It's really closely related to mint, and mint is a known bully in the garden. Typically if you pot mint or lemon balm in a flower pot or a garden space, it can just take over. So I am going to be heavily pruning that lemon balm because I like my dianthus, but you know what, now that it's there, it's probably always going to be there in that pot. Coming back into this middle bed, I do have one more little bird of paradise starting out right here. And in this bed, I have native Greg's mist flower. Does really, really well here in Texas. It will die back to the ground in the winter, but then it comes back and it has these beautiful, really pretty, very fragrant purple flowers that pollinators just love. I have a pink sage, which is another native here in Texas. This is its second year. I got this one at the same time that I got the black-eyed Susan over there, and it has done really, really well. It does kind of struggle a little bit more with aphids, and I counteract that by using some soapy water. I'll spray on the edges of these plants to kill those aphids back. I also have portulaca. Does really well out here in the desert. It is like a succulent that flowers these really pretty little small rose looking flowers. And Josh's mom gave me this pretty little rabbit for Easter, and I planted the portulaca in it, and I think it's just really beautiful. I also have lavender and rosemary in this bed. I recently cut all the lavender off the flowers off the top, and you can see it's starting to come up with new growth. at the nodes below the point I cut. This was covered in purple flowers about a month ago, and I left the flowers on for so long because they were just a beautiful statement in this garden, as everything else was just starting out and really small. It was like the centerpiece of the garden, having this bed full of purple flowers. In the center of this bed, I do also have an olive tree that we are going to be taking with us and planting in the ground on the 5 acres of raw land here soon. I've noticed that the olive trees, they are really hardy. They're not super frost hardy, so they do need some protection in the winter. But I think we're going to try to plant him in a partial shade spot that's protected from the wind, and I think he will last a really long time with us. At least that's the hope. I do have a second olive tree up on my porch. This olive tree that I have growing on my porch was not protected from the wind, and even though I covered him with frost fabric in the bad storms we had over the winter, he still died back. And this tree was about 4 feet tall, and I basically cut him back down, and he's just now coming back pretty late here in the spring. And so I'm happy that he lived, but that really showed me that we need to take care of our olive trees in the winter. Yes, they can handle a light frost, especially when they're acclimated, but he is, you know, just like the olive tree down below, and he did not survive as well as the other one that was protected by the house from the wind. In this bed here, I also have another native I got from the Wildflower Center last year. This is silver ponyfoot. It has really nice, soft, velvety leaves, and it's pretty well suited to our desert climate. They are native here, and last year this plant actually grew as a great ground cover and filled up this entire bed. You can see where he died back in the winter. I basically trimmed him back down to the ground, and he is coming back beautifully. Across the path from this garden area, we do have more tomatoes. These were my extra tomatoes that wouldn't fit in my other garden bed. I always start too many just in case some of them fail to thrive. We'll still have enough to fill the bed. Fortunately, this year, everybody did really well. I thought I could maximize my harvest by planting them out in this garden area right here. I have another Buratino tomato. We have a Crimson Cushion next to it, a red Brandywine, and then Costaludo Fiorentino. And this Costaludo Fiorentino, look at how beautiful that tomato is that it's growing on it. This is another one that I should have picked the tomato off to let the tomato grow a strong root system. And you can see the height of this tomato versus the height of the ones that didn't fruit right away. But this fruit looked so healthy and beautiful, I just decided to leave it on here, and then once that fruit is harvested, I think the tomato will catch back up. You can see we already have some nice big tomatoes. That's the Brandywine. The Brandywine leaves look different than a regular tomato leaf, so I think that's kind of interesting. And then the Crimson Cushion has more of an accordion structure to the tomato. It's a little bit more wrinkly. At the base of these plants, I also have some herbs that I started from seed this year. We have another thyme plant right there. This is a little bitty baby rosemary. And then this is a blue Sirius sage, or this might be Mexican mint. I planted both in this area, and the roly-polies killed one of them. I actually think this might be Mexican mint, which is a type of marigold. And then all in this bed, I have volunteer hollyhocks, which I'm probably gonna thin out, but it's just hollyhocks are one of my favorite flowers, so I don't really want to thin them out, but I also don't want them to take nutrients from my tomatoes. On this end, I do have a blue butterfly pea, and he's got some flowers right here. Beautiful plant. I've actually gone through a whole seed pack of these, and they've failed every year. And this is actually the last seed I had in my seed pack, and it's doing really well, and it's sprouted, and it's growing, and I'm going to try to save seeds from it this year so that I could plant more in the future. Blue butterfly pea is a natural food. dye. And you can also make a really neat pink lemonade. When you put them into the glass of water, they'll have a coloration like this, but once you add acidity from the lemon juice, it creates a natural pink lemonade. So I really want to try that. After I get enough pods to save seed from, I will start harvesting the flowers for a natural food coloring. Just kind of cool. Here's more hollyhocks, and I have another portulaca and this stump, and this one's not doing well because the lizard keeps getting in here and uprooting and digging up this portulaca. So I thought this stump was kind of a cool feature. We actually got this tree limb when we were cutting down a tree for our neighbor down the street, and it had a natural opening from where the center had rotted out, and I thought it would make a good flower pot. It doesn't hold moisture as well as a normal pot. In fact, I think we will need to ratchet strap it closed because it will split eventually. And yeah, it's not been the ideal flower pot I thought it would be. I may need to line it to try to hold some of that moisture in. And I've also noticed that, you know, the reason that the tree rotted is because it was full of pests. And so those pests are still in there. Like there's roly-polies, there's silverfish, things like earwigs that will do harm to plants. So probably wasn't the best idea to use that as a flower pot, but I thought I'd try. I thought it would be a neat little pretty flower pot there. Hello, Miss Evie. You are just doing so good. She's my garden helper. She likes to hang out with me while I do all my garden things, talk to my plants, water the plants. She likes to hang out. Yeah, yes. Her leg is doing really good. On my social media, a lot of people have been following along with her journey with her broken leg. This is the bone that she broke, and she broke it right above her wrist where there was very little to heal that bone because there wasn't a whole lot to connect to. So she had a metal plate put in, got the metal plate removed. We had a piece of bone right here. You could see there's an indentation. She had a piece of bone removed. And this section was an open wound with bone exposure for close to a year actually, because she was having trouble healing. The skin wouldn't grow closed, and we were doing bandage changes twice a week for several months. And she's a good, strong girl, and you know, it was just a long process. With her breed, we were not given the option to amputate the leg because with it being a front limb, 80% of their weight's on their front legs, and with her being, you know, pretty heavy, large, extra large breed dog, they thought that her other skinny leg would break under the pressure if we removed this one. Her leg diameter is about the diameter of a beagle leg, but she is a very large dog, almost as tall as a Great Dane, so they were concerned that she wouldn't do well with just one front leg. So we did everything we could to save it, and you can see now she's got a scar, but other than that, she's doing good, huh, Evie? She's like, too much attention. Every time you put the camera on me, she doesn't like the camera that much, right? Yes. Yeah, she's like, I just want to enjoy my day in the shade. Okay, I'll be back. I do have some hollyhocks that are getting a lot of rust. They're not doing very good. They did flower earlier this season, and I'm probably just going to cut it back to the ground, fertilize, water it, and see if it comes back because he is struggling. They typically do come back every year. Leaning up against him is what is this? I think this is Swiss chard that has gone to seed. So I was just letting the seeds go so that they can drop their seeds. We'll grow more Swiss chard and then I'll pull the plant out. Or I might save some seeds. And then this right here is collard greens, which also went to seed. We did harvest some collard greens this year, and I was putting it in soups, kind of like as a kale substitute, and it was really good. And then here at the, oh look, hummingbird. We get a lot of hummingbirds. They like to migrate through here, and they time their migration with the same time as our ocotillos bloom. And this town is kind of like an oasis. for the hummingbirds to stop on their migration route. So we get a lot of them. But this arched trellis I put in when I moved here. I actually brought it over from the last house I lived at. And the first year I moved in here, which was back at the end of 2021, I did plant some honeysuckle. And I love this honeysuckle because it is evergreen. It's perennial here and it never loses its leaves even in the coldest days of winter. It actually does better in the winter, and I noticed that it struggles a little bit in the heat of the summer. And just a couple weeks ago it was covered in flowers. I'm hoping it'll flower some more for us, but this was literally a white and yellow plant right here. But now that it is on its third season, it did finally grow up and connect in the middle. And you know what? This is our last season at this location. So I am going to go ahead and leave this here because I wouldn't want to move this beautiful honeysuckle, and whoever moves in after me will get to take care of it and hopefully steward it well. And then I also have irises that we got, we found them on Facebook Marketplace. Someone was getting rid of them, and I think I started with 4 or 5 and it's just filled up this bed. So I may take a couple irises with us when we leave and leave the rest here, but they do multiply. They multiply very well and very fast. Then in this pot here we have some herbs that this is also their third year here. They've been doing pretty good. This spearmint is struggling a little bit with the heat, but I also have broadleaf sage and oregano and some more sage on this end that was sprouted from the original sage over here. I'm actually not too worried about this mint because mint is a bully and it will choke out other plants in the garden. So since it's struggling, I'm probably going to cut it down about half of it back so that everything else can kind of grow up. And it's okay to knock the mint down every now and then because it will actually fill up anywhere that there's roots, and it'll pop up in different areas of the bed. So I'm not even the slightest bit worried about it. So maybe we can make some minty lemonade this week. Put some cucumber agua frescas and add some mint to it, and I think that's a good use of it because it is struggling a little bit with this heat. Get rid of some of the tops of these and let it recover there. I am watering this pot about 2 or 3 times a week, but once we get up into the hundreds, it typically is hard for a lot of herbs to do well without struggling. I do love my green stalk that's here on the edge of my porch leading into the chicken yard, and look at it. This year I have bush beans growing in the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th tiers, and they're doing really, really good. We do already have flowers on these bush beans. I have red swan bush, I have some classic green beans. I may have put a couple lima beans in here. I don't really remember, to be honest with you. I think I might have some white beans that look kind of like navy beans, but anyway, they are just doing really good. In the bottom tier, I have okra, which is just now sprouting now that the weather's getting nice and hot. And then in the top, I bought different petunias, and I just love these petunias, especially the white ones. I really like these red ones. And when I bought the petunias, they weren't flowering yet, so it was kind of a mystery what color they were going to turn out to be. And I really like that we have such a great assortment. These violets are just lovely. We have pretty pink ones, and again, these are the red ones. So they are just gorgeous. And then up on the porch next to my olive tree, I do have my final growing space here next to the house. This is a red Malabar spinach, which it actually was growing and it was trying to go up my electrical pole, and so I ended up cutting it back, and we had spinach in our dinner last night from what I pruned off right here. And this red Malabar spinach does really good in the heat, and it does get a decent amount of sun in this spot here on the porch. I have 3 Malabar spinach plants here in this spot, so I'm sure this trellis is just going to be full. And my plan is, I think anytime it gets up and over, I'm just going to prune off the top and maybe prune from the sides so that we can incorporate some spinach into our meals. And then at the bottom, I do have echinacea in one corner and some struggling zinnias in the other corner. Here, I think I have queen, lime, pink zinnias, and then I also have green envy zinnias and then a purple zinnia in the back. And I've noticed every time that I've grown zinnias, they do tend to struggle here. I think that the heat is a little bit too much for them, so I just try to make sure that they're really well watered. And if I get a couple flowers on them each season, that makes me happy because the flowers are typically long-lived, and it just brings a little bit extra color and attracts pollinators to the garden while they last. Well, that's it for our first look at the garden here in 2024. I did start my seeds and started planting out here probably at the beginning of April. So here we are about 2 months into this year's season, and everything changes so much from week to week. You have different things that are petering out, different things that are in their prime, and I really like having a garden where different things are flowering throughout the season so that you can always bring in pollinators and add a little bit of color and beauty to the garden. I am really enjoying the garden this year, and I cannot wait because we are going to have a lot of changes coming. Josh and I are waiting to close on our 5 acres just outside of town, and there's so much that I think would be amazing to share with you guys. This land right now is raw. The first thing we do when we close on the property, we need to get electric, we need to get septic put in, we need to figure out our water source. We've already got quotes on wells, looked at tapping into the city. Not an option because they would annex us into city limits if we did that. The other option is rainwater collection, which we are looking into. We have many friends that are local here in the area that do rainwater collection as their sole water source, and it does work for them even though we do live in a desert. So that is probably the route that we're leaning towards working on. And the biggest thing that I'm thinking about is the garden. The garden space that we're going to put up at this new property is going to fit into a 40 by 115 foot square area that I'm going to be putting raised garden beds in. And so that makes me think, you know, if we have an 800 square foot garden, that's a lot of water. So we're going to figure out our water situation. We are going to build our house from scratch, from the ground up, and I'm going to bring you guys here along for the journey along the way. And it's gonna be good. So lots to come, right, Evie? There's gonna be lots to come. We're gonna stay tuned. Well, thank you guys for hanging out with me today, and I will catch you on the next one. Are you our #1 fan? You like to watch everything we do? She says I get all the behind the scenes footage, don't I? Yeah.